In this lecture, I am going to tell you how we can create update API in Node.js. I will create blog update API endpoint. So let's open our blog.out.js file and then let's add a new route for our blog update API endpoint. Route method will be put and URL will be our base URL slash blog slash blog ID as a route parameter slash update, and it will execute blog controllers update method, and this route should be protected, so I will use this auth modular to protect this endpoint so that an user need to provide a API token through authorization header to update his blog. If you don't know how to create this auth modular, you can watch this create a secure REST API videos which is already included in this series to create this auth modular. Okay, now let's open our blog.controller.js file and then let's export a method called update, and then let's get request and response as a parameter to this method, and then I'll create a new variable called blog underscore id where I'll store the blog id which is present inside our request URL as a parameter, and we can get this blog underscore id with the help of request params object, and the parameter name is blog underscore id, and then I will find the blog with this blog id from our blogs collection with the help of blog models find one method, and inside this find one method we need to provide the condition inside an object, so the condition will be underscore id is equal to the blog id which is present inside our request URL as a route parameter, and this will return us a promise, so we can use async await or we can use callback method to get the data from this find one method. So I'm going to use callback method to get the blog data, and we'll get the blog data here, and if any error occurs then it will return us errors to this catch block, and if any error occurs then I will return a JSON response with the error data, and inside this callback method I will check if no block found, then I will return a JSON response with message no block found, so the message will be no block found, and this data will be blank object, and if any block found then I will check if this blog is owned by currently authenticated user or not. So first of all I will store the currently authenticated user data to a variable current underscore user, and we can get currently authenticated user data from request user key, because our blog update API endpoint is protected, right? We use this auth modular so that an user need to provide API token through authorization header, then only we can get currently authenticated user data from request user key. Now I will check if this blog is owned by currently authenticated user or not, so I'll write the condition blog dot, so let's check where we store the user ID. You see we store the user ID to this created by field, so I'll check blog dot created by not is equal to current user dot underscore id, that means id, if id doesn't match then I will return a JSON response with message access denied, that means if this blog is not owned by current user then we will return a JSON response with message access denied. You can modify the message as per your choice, and if this blog is owned by currently authenticated user then I will open a try catch block inside this else block, so let's open a try catch block for error handling, and if any error occurs inside this try block then I'll return a JSON response with error data from this catch block. Okay, and now I'm going to add validation rules for our block fields. I already added validation rules during block creation API endpoint, so let's check our create method where I used node input validator package to add the validation rules for our block fields. You see I already added validation rules with our node input validator package. You can check node input validator package documentation, or you can watch my CRUD API first part where I create the blog record toward mongoose collection. So I used this node input validator package during block creation API endpoint to add the validation rules. Okay, so now I'm going to take the code from our create method for the validation. So let's check our create method, and I will copy these lines of code from here. Don't worry, I will explain line by line. So I'm taking the code and I'll paste the code inside this try block. So the first thing I'm doing here, I'm checking if there is any files user is uploading, and if there is any image file, that means user is updating the blog image, then we are adding a key to our request body object called image, and we are providing the files to this request body image key. That means we'll be able to get image from this request body image key, because we'll get the files from request files.image, right? We'll not get the files directly to our request body object. That's why we're providing the image like this way. Okay, and we are creating the validator instant with the help of validator, and inside this validator we need to provide the data in the first parameter, and in the second parameter we need to provide the rules. I'm not going to pass the rules directly here. Instead of passing the rules directly, I'm creating a new variable called rules where I'll store all the rules. So let's cut these rules from here and let's provide the rules to this variable, and then I'll provide this rules variable to this validator second parameters. Okay, and I'll modify our rules object, because this image rule will not be there always, because if user trying to update the blog image, then there should be these rules for the image, but the image field will not be necessary all the time during blog updation, right? So what I will do, I'll add a key to our rules object inside this if condition, where I'm checking if user is updating the blog image, right? And if user is updating the blog image, then only I'll add these rules for the image. And now I'll remove these rules from this rules object. Okay, and we are passing these rules inside our validator second parameter, and then we are calling check method of our validator instant, and we are using await here. Because we are using await here, we need to add async before the method, right? So let's add async before the method. We need to add async before this callback also, because we are going to use async, we are going to use await inside this callback method. That's why I need to add async here also. And if validation fails, then I'm returning a JSON response with status 422 with validation error messages. And if validation passes, then what I'll do, I'll check if user is updating the blog image, then we will upload the new blog image and we'll remove the old blog image. So I'll take the code from our create method where we already uploaded the blog image. So let's take this code and let's paste this code inside our update method. So I'm checking if request files are there, and if there is an image user is updating for the blog, then what I will do, I'll create a new variable called image file where I'll store the image file, and then I'm creating a new file name for the image with the help of dateNow library and with the help of image original file name, and we are providing blog-image at the middle, and then we are generating the image path with the help of public path global variable, which I already created. If I open our index.js file, you see I created this public path global variable here where I'll store the public path, so that actually this is a global variable, right? So that we can use this public path variable anywhere of our project. So we are creating the image path with the help of this public path global variable slash upload slash blog images slash the image file name, and then we are able to upload the image with the help of image file dot mv method, because we already used this express file upload package to our express app. That's why we are able to upload the image with the help of image file.move method. And we need to provide the image path inside this mv method, and this will return as a promise, so we are using await here. And then what I need to do, after uploading the new image, we need to delete the old image from the path, right? So I'll create a new variable called old path, where I'll store the old path, and we'll get the old path of the image with public path /upload/blog images, and then we need to provide the file name. So we'll get the file name from our blog object, and the field name is image, because we stored the image name to this image field of our blog model. If I open our blog model, you see we stored the image name to this image field, and this will hold the old path for the blog image. So now I need to delete the old image from the path. So I'll remove the old image with the help of fs library. So first of all, let's import fs library at the top of our blog controller. We do not need to install fs library because this is a inbuilt library in Node.js, so we can use fs library. Now let's get back to our update method. So first of all, I'll check if this path exists or not. Okay, so first of all, I'll check if path exists with this existing method, and inside this existing method we need to provide the path, and if path exists, then we need to delete the path, right, with the help of unlink sync method. And inside this unlink sync, we need to provide the old path. Okay, so this will remove the image from the path. So we already uploaded images to our public uploads image blog images folder, right? That's why we're generating the path like this way: our public path /upload/blog images, and then the image file name. Okay, and then it's time to update our blog data. So we can update the blog data with the help of blog models update one method. And inside this update one method, we need to provide the conditions inside an object in the first parameter. So the condition will be _id is equal to the blog id, which is present inside our request URL as a route parameter. And inside the second parameter, we need to provide the fields, which fields we are going to update. So I will take the code from our create method. Yeah, so I will take this code from here. And I'll paste all the codes here, and I'm not going to update created by field, because we do not need to update created by field for the blog. So I'm going to update title, short description, category, and image name for the blog. So if user is not updating the blog image, then I'll create the image file name variable here, and this will be the old image file name, which we will get from this blog object. Okay, and we are providing this image file name to this image field during updating the blog, and this will return as a promise. So I'll use await here. That's it to update the blog data. And after updating the blog data, for now I will return a JSON response with message blog successfully updated. So I will return a JSON response with status code 200, and the message will be blog successfully updated. Now let's open our Postman, and then let's execute our blog update API endpoint. From Postman, let's open a new tab, and then let's provide the request URL, which will be our base URL /blog/blog id as a route parameter / update, and the API method will be put. Let's execute this endpoint. You see we are getting a message called please login to continue, because we need to provide API token through authorization header. So we can generate API token with the help of our login API. So I'm generating API token for this user, and then I'll copy this token from here and I'll paste the token inside our headers authorization key. Now let's execute this endpoint. You see we are getting access denied message, because I think the ID of this block is not owned by this user. That's why we are getting this access denied message. So let's take a block ID which is owned by this Tony@gmail user. So let's check our getBlocks API endpoint. So let's find a block ID which is owned by Tony@gmail user. So let's take this ID and let's paste this ID here. You see we are getting validation error messages. So let's check if we are providing any wrong ID here. Are we getting any messages? You see we are getting these messages. We are returning these messages from our catch block, right? But this is not a mongoose ID, that's why we are getting the messages from our catch block. So we can also check if the ID is a mongoose ID or not. So I can add a code here, so we can check an ID is mongoose ID or not with the help of mongoose types object ID dot isValid method, and inside this isValid method you need to provide the ID, and if this block ID is a mongoose object ID then it will return us true, and if this block ID is not a mongoose object ID then this will return us a false. So if the ID user is providing is not valid mongoose ID, then we'll return a JSON response with message invalid block ID. Okay, now let's execute our endpoint again. Okay, I think we need to add all condition here. You see now we are getting invalid block ID because this block ID is not a mongoose ID. So let's provide a mongoose ID here, and then let's try to provide invalid mongoose ID. You see now we are getting no block found, and this message is coming from this block. Okay, so we can use this code inside our details method also, where we need to check the ID is mongoose ID or not. So let's check our details method, and we can put the code here to check our ID is a mongoose ID or not. Yeah, so if this block ID is not a mongoose ID, then we can return a JSON response with message invalid block ID. Save this file. So we are good to go for our update method. Now we need to provide the data, whatever the data we want to update for this block. Okay, so everything is working fine for our update API endpoint. So let's provide title, short description. Okay, first of all let's change the ID here. Okay, now let's provide title, short description and category field. And if you remember, we are not returning category ID for each block. You see, we are returning only category details, flag and name field, because we need to select the underscore ID field for the category also, because we need to provide the category ID during block update API endpoint, right? You see, category field is required and we need to provide the category ID for the block. So we need to select underscore ID for the category details. So I will modify the project object which is inside our list method. So I'm going to select category details ID field also, and also I will select creator underscore ID also to get the user ID. Okay, now this will select category ID and user ID for the blog, and I will pass this code inside our project object, which is inside our create method. So where I modified actually, okay, I modified I think inside details method. So let's modify this inside our list method also, and let's modify inside our create method where I use this project object. So let's get to our create method, and then let's modify the project object to select category details underscore ID field and creator underscore ID field. Now if I execute our getBlocks API endpoint, you see we are getting underscore ID for the category details. Now let's add title, short description and category field for the blog. So I'm adding one by one here. So I added all the fields one by one. Now let's execute this endpoint again. You see now we are getting blog successfully updated, but we are not getting the updated blog data, right? So what we can do, we can take all the code from our details method or from our create method. So I'm gonna take all the code from our create method, and I'll return the blog data in the same structure what we are returning from our details method or in the create method. So I'll take this code from here, and I'll paste this code inside our update method. After updating the blog data, I'll return the updated blog data, right? And inside this match underscore ID, we need to provide the blog ID which is present inside our route parameter. So let's provide blog underscore ID here. You can watch my blog details API endpoint for this. So first of all, we are selecting the user data for the blog, and we are selecting the category data for the blog, and then we are providing a match object here to select the exact blog, and then we are selecting specific fields for the blog because we are doing it inside our update method, because we need to provide the JSON structure same as the structure we are returning from our details method or in our create method. Okay, and we are using aggregate method to get the data, and this will return as a promise, so we are using auth here. And after getting the blog data, I'll return a JSON response with message. The message will be blog successfully updated, and then let's change the status code to 200. And to load image URL for the blog, we need to call hided method. That's why we're calling blog.hided, and then we're passing the first data, because this aggregate will return as the data inside an array, so we need to take the first record. That's why we are taking the first record. Now let's remove this code. Now if I try to update our blog again, we'll have the newly updated blog data. Okay, now if I execute this again, you see now we are getting the data inside a JSON structure which is similar to our getBlocks API endpoint or similar to our blog details API endpoint. Now if I try to update our image, then we need to add another field here called image, and this should be file type, and then we need to select the image. Let's select this image and try to upload the image. You see now this image URL is different. Okay, so our image is also updating. In the next lecture, I am going to create delete method API endpoint in Node.js. I will create blog delete in API endpoint, so stay connected.